hello, builders of good. Thank you for joining us on the Build Good Fundraising Podcast. For those in the room, thank you for joining us for Build Good Live. We go live every second Wednesday because fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So we do these things to take the mystery out of raising money. Now, in every episode of the Build Good Podcast, we coach you how to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 parts. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging donors. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating their gifts, celebrating every gift. And number 5 is reporting back to donors in a responsive and real-time way so they know their philanthropy is effective. And if you master these 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part, and your revenue will grow, and so will your career. So every week we focus on one part of the flywheel, and today we are focusing on listening. Now, how many times have you heard you should listen to your donors, right? You should listen to what your donors have to say. It's one of the best things that you can do, including on this podcast. We've talked about this a bunch. And how many times have you nodded your head in agreement and said, that's a fantastic idea, but never actually implemented a system or a process to continually actually get closer to your donors and listen to them to gain new insights? Well, on today's show, Emily Taylor will walk us through a few questions that you can actually ask yourself to start listening to your audience so you can grow your audience. We're seeing for-profit companies do this really well. They're investing lots of money in getting to know their ideal customer. We just had a Super Bowl where most of the ads that you saw had massive amounts of pre-testing and research gone into them to make sure they resonate with the ideal client. And the nonprofit sector can do this too. And it doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. In fact, the smaller your donor file is, the easier some of this is to do. But you do need a bit of guidance, and Emily is here to provide that guidance. She's the principal of her own firm, where she guides nonprofits to actually get out of their day-to-day work to meet donors where they're at. And she calls her approach strategic listening. And that's what we're going to learn today. So let's get right into it. Here's our chat with Emily Taylor. Emily, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I want to frame this conversation by starting with the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. Those are like the broad strokes. Those are the 2 different ways that we can listen to donors, right? So quantitative is just like analytics and data. This is donors speaking to us through their actions, and it's the data that we can easily measure. It's in front of us. It's gift size, gift frequency, which offers they responded to, which offers they didn't respond to. All of that stuff, the data can tell us, and it's right in front of us, and it's easy to measure. But even though data is kind of like black and white, it's still a pretty low resolution picture, because data can only tell you what data is. Data can't tell you why data is. And that's kind of the qualitative stuff that you're so good at. So what is the qualitative stuff?
Sure. And I think you hit it on the head. It is about painting the picture. And I love quantitative data. I think it does give us a lot of concrete information that you can know what to do with. You can see, what percentage of people answered this versus that. But it's really about what people have done in the past. You can go and look and see when they donated and maybe what period they did. But you're right, you can't tell why. And so qualitative data helps us paint the rest of that picture. It helps us understand why somebody chose to do something. It can also help us think to the future. So even though things may have happened in the past that we can measure quantitatively, the qualitative work can help us think about, well, what can we do in the future? Because we understand the why, we understand the past behavior. And if we put those things together, we can really, better predict the future. But we can also, I think during qualitative is also really important during change because that's where we can't rely on the past as much. And so, if you're changing something in your program or, heaven forbid we go through another like COVID type of situation again, like talking to people and understanding what's on their mind can help you better predict their future behaviors.
Yeah, you just said something really interesting, which is what's on their mind. Why is it important that we know what's on people's mind?
Well, people change and it helps you understand their why. So with donors, everyone's reading, these different news sources. They're getting information from different news sources every day. They're maybe thinking differently about the world. And so to be able to, listen to people and understand what's on their mind is their experiences, their day-to-day experiences might be changing how they approach donations and how they see them. And so being able to, get a sense for where people are at can help you meet them where they are when you are reaching out to them, asking or engaging them in different ways.
Right. I want to take the fear of this qualitative stuff out of people's mind a little bit, because sometimes you think, well, I've asked 10 different people and I got 10 different answers. And what am I supposed to do with that? I was hoping I would get this very clear, coherent picture of like, everybody says they care about this stuff. And now that's easy. We can lean into that. So put us at ease a little bit of the power that all of us have to actually implement this at our shop and gain some insights, even if it seems like the data we get back is a little bit fuzzy.
Sure. And it is more of an art. It's not as clear as quantitative data, but it's meaningful. And I think that's the real power in it. So what I say, if you listen to 10 different people and they say 10 different things, that is not clear. That might not give you a clear direction. And it might not be something that's worth putting your effort into changing. But when you do see patterns, you do talk to 10 people and you hear maybe 5 of them say something, that's starting to build in more towards a real learning and something you could change. There's stats on there about you can learn 80% of your information from 5 people. So if you're wanting to talk to people about something and you start to see a pattern in those 5 people, that's a real insight that you can use and move forward with and trust that, it's going to affect a wider variety of people. But you're really looking for patterns. And also there are the things people say. So, if you're talking to people about a specific campaign, you might find that people say different things, but their why behind it is similar. And so I'm just trying to think of an example that, maybe people say there's different reasons they didn't make a donation, but when you really dig deeper and talk to them, you find they all didn't quite understand what you were asking for. And so they might say, oh, well, I didn't see the email, or I don't have money right now, or they might, but if you dig into that why, and that's the power of that you can't get from just quantitative information, is to be able to ask that why and try to find the similarities. And I'm going to give a little story there to make more sense is, I find people reference, there's like a Henry Ford quote that, is about, if I would have asked people, what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses rather than a car. And I think people interpret that as, well, we shouldn't ask people things. We should just give them what we think they want. And really, if you listen to that, we wanted a faster horse. They're saying they want to move faster. They want to get from A to B faster than they could before, faster than they can on a horse. And so once you understand that why, then you can start to think of like, okay, well, how can we deliver that speed? And that's really where you want to try to get to is, what is that, deep down what people want? How do you compare it to that quantitative data that you have and use that to help give the people what they want so that you can really build that relationship with them?
Yeah, that was I was about to get into the Henry Ford quote, so I'm glad you did. Because on LinkedIn last week, a product manager, so in the tech space, not in our space, threw out that quote, right? And basically saying like, you shouldn't listen to users too much. You kind of got to build a product that you know they will want. They're not going to be able to tell you what the next great product should be. And then he threw out that quote, and I just kind of engaged him a little bit and said, well, technically the people were right. They told him they wanted a faster horse, and he gave them a faster horse. Now, they didn't know that the form of the faster horse would be a car. So the core desire, he didn't meet that core desire, right? He just met it in a different way than they were even able to imagine for themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the key of doing listening is to go beyond exactly what people say and take that step back. There's a lot of strategies like there's a 5 why strategy where every time you talk to somebody, you ask them, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that? And then and keep going, be the 5-year-old and really dig in to understand the why, because that's where you start to find the patterns, because there's only so many reasons we're motivated to do things, and the better we can understand those, the easier it'll be to connect with people.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something you said, which is identifying the patterns. This is how listening often looks like. Richard from accounting, his spouse thought that the newsletter it looked too expensive. This board member, his friend came to the gala and he made this comment. We sent out a mailer and 5 people called and they wanted to be taken off the mailing list. We sent out this email and the unsubscribe rate was like 3%. And then it's very easy for us. I have a lot of sympathy for this. It's easy for us to kind of freak out a little bit and be like, oh no, we did something wrong. Like people don't like this. We're getting negative feedback. And we haven't talked to donors. We just have talked to 1 or 2 donors who had this, but we haven't actually considered the entire donor file. We sent 5,000 letters and 5 people called to take us off to the mailing list, which is a tiny percentage, all things considered. But you get 5 calls in one day, and it's very easy for us to feel like everybody hates us. We did something wrong. So talk to us a little bit about weighing those one-off, weighing these little signals in the market that we interpret to mean something when it may or may not be something. It may be something, there may be something there, but how do we think about that?
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point. I think a lot of people don't want to do this qualitative listening because it is scary. It's really hard to hear. It's one thing to hear negative feedback, because you see a statistic of people dropping out, because you can kind of fill in that reason. But when you talk to people or you leave open-ended questions and do more qualitative work, it opens you up to some negative feedback. And even if you don't actually get that, it's scary. And so it's going to be a little, it's vulnerable. But in terms of what you were talking about, where, you're seeing this percentage and it's like, well, is this part of a trend? Is this just the only 5 people that ever thought that? And I'm referencing if like 5 people asked to be taken off, and you have that statistic, you have the quantitative information. And so the qualitative is part of better understanding that. And so I'm just going to think through my own thoughts in that situation is, you can look through your database and try to better understand, is it a certain segment that might be that 5 people are a larger representation of? And if you can't, go and talk to those people, because you're never going to know why unless you actually have a way to get that feedback, because it could just be 5 very personal situations that you had no control over. But if you do have a chance and see a little bit of a pattern, even if it's you only talk to 1 person, but the next time that happens, you talk to one of those people, you're going to start to build an understanding of that why, and be able to see if that's part of a larger trend and be able to address it, and not even just to see. One of the things, like if you can't talk to a lot of people, you can also try things. So let's say you don't talk to enough people, but you talk to 1 or 2 people and they give you an idea that maybe, I'm trying to think of a reason why maybe you asked for more money than they were comfortable, or they felt like it was maybe they were getting things too frequently. You could try a different strategy and try, maybe doing communication less often or asking for a smaller amount. And that's an experiment. You're sort of withholding the judgment until you can see if that actually was the case. It's just a hypothesis.
So is it fair to think about the qualitative stuff, the questions we're going to ask donors, getting their answers? It's going to be a little bit fuzzy, a little bit messy, but we're going to look for some patterns. Like are enough people sort of saying the same thing? Is it fair to say that stuff, we do that to come up with a hypothesis, and then we test that hypothesis, and then we use the quantitative side to measure and evaluate whether we were right on the qualitative insight?
Yeah, that's definitely one way you can use it. There's other ways, like I kind of look at, if it's quantitative and qualitative, you can do it, one than the other, or vice versa. So you can also do qualitative upfront to even understand what kind of data you should gather. So let's say you're considering segmenting your audience and trying to, reach out to them in different ways. You could use that qualitative upfront to better understand how you might start to collect the data around those segments. So it's sort of like either direction, but yeah, the two combined can help really give you that, what's that why and what's the concrete stuff that we can test to see if it works.
Right. In a minute here, I want to get into the actual practical application. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we address the stakes of like not doing this stuff, or what you have to gain. Because oftentimes we think that sounds complicated. I don't really want to do it. Fine. We're doing fine. We'll just keep doing this other stuff. But there's a real business case here for why you should be listening to donors and starting to get to know your audience a lot better. Are you familiar with the McDonald's milkshake for breakfast story, Emily?
No.
Okay, so the McDonald's hired these consultants to figure out. They wanted to win the breakfast game. Everybody's doing breakfast sandwiches now, and it was like, who's going to win breakfast? That was the next sort of frontier in fast food, and people just kind of couldn't figure it out. Couldn't, like, is the breakfast sandwich not good enough, or is it because they tried all this different stuff. And then one consulting firm just decided to do a bunch of qualitative stuff. And part of that was just like literally sitting at a McDonald's every morning and just watching what people ordered, and like then talking to them about why they ordered it. And then, same with the drive-through, people would go through the drive-through and they would like literally stop them and just like ask them a few questions. And they figured out that people weren't buying as much breakfast sandwiches, but they were buying a lot of milkshakes, which the qualitative, the data could have showed you you're selling a decent amount of milkshakes in the morning. But why, right? It's like, well, turns out people didn't want to have this messy thing in their hand while they're driving. They needed something that would give them lots of energy for the day, but that was easy to consume, but they didn't want to feel ashamed about it. So in all the customer research, customers never talked about buying milkshakes in the morning, because they didn't want to admit, I drink a milkshake in the morning, because it seems like unhealthy. It was only once they went on site and like watched what people did and then talked to them about it that they were able to figure that out. And then they pivoted and just like actually started promoting milkshakes in the morning, and it made a real business difference for McDonald's, right? So these insights, they could make a big difference for your nonprofit.
Yeah. And I'll say, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show about the for-profit world and how they are doing a lot of this listening, they're building lifestyles, they're getting into people's homes. I know that because I used to do that. That was my job. I, I'd go into people's homes, I'd stop people in grocery stores and talk to them. And, I know that nonprofits don't always have the capacity to do all that, but there are two things. One, the less you're listening to people, the more this for-profit world is getting inside their head, is pulling them away from generosity, because, for-profits are getting into that space of feeling good. How do you make you feel good? And so I think nonprofits have this duty to listen to people, to really make sure they're connecting with people, because, your mission is so much more important than selling a milkshake. But if we're not doing that, you're not going to be able to make sure people are staying connected with that. On the other side, there's also just general generosity. And if, for your work. And so if you're not listening to people, I find a lot of my clients tend to have their average age is going up and up of their donors. And so if you're not really listening and finding out how younger people, newer people to your organization are feeling and interpreting your work, how they like to engage, and just relying on the data from the past, you're not going to be able to, keep your donor base, sorry, I don't know what
Sure, yeah.
young, but not just have the same people continue to support you, to build in that new pool of that new pipeline of donors. And so it's just part of growing is really being able to know who those people are and how you can connect to them.
Yeah, and the people who are on your file who are aging, an average legacy gift in Canada is about $33,000. It's I think it might be around $35K in the US. But you can, through listening, you can offer something much more meaningful than a for-profit company can, which is you can actually give them the chance to leave a meaningful legacy and preserve the values that were important to them during their lifetime. So they feel like in some way they can live on forever. And those values can be around to inspire their children and their grandchildren, and they feel like their life had a lot of meaning because of even the way their life gets celebrated later isn't this wonderful thing that they're part of celebrating and preserving. And you can only do that by listening and by having meaningful conversations. And the qualitative stuff is all the legacy stuff is all about qualitative stuff. It's all just about listening to your donors and seeing what their passions and motivations are.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's, I'll also make the distinction is that, there is planned giving and major gifts type of listening where you're listening one-on-one to people and maybe gathering, what is that specific person motivated by? And then there's the more just larger group of donors where you're listening to try to predict their behavior and try to better understand what motivates them, or maybe what segments of a donor database you are. So I just say that because sometimes I find people are thinking about one versus the other, and it's just a little different strategy for each.
Very helpful distinction. Let's focus, for the purpose of the remainder of the podcast, let's focus on the one-to-many, kind of where you're listening to many donors at once, sort of the sometimes called mass. I don't like that word, but mass to mid-level sort of file. Your average donor next door, your broader base of community level donors. Let's focus on them. And are you okay to do a bit of a hypothetical, Emily? Can I?
Yeah,
Okay.
That'd be great.
All right, let's say that you're a small shop called Neighborly Care, Inc., and you've got maybe 5,000 donors on file, and you've got a budget of 1 to 2 million per year. So you're not tiny, but you're for sure not a big shop. You're a small shop. You've got a few people on staff. You get it. You've listened to this podcast. You're like, listening is important. I want to do this. This sounds like it's a good thing for us to do. We haven't done much of this before. We have a decent major giving program in place, but we need to do a better job of engaging the broader base of donors. We would like to start listening to donors. Where do we start?
Yeah, no, I love that example because it definitely applies to a lot of organizations out there. So the trick with strategic listening is to first start what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And so, let's say going back to that example of we want to lower the average age of our donors. And so in that case, the more you can be specific about who you're listening to, the less people you have to listen to, because you can really kind of hone in on that group. So let's say we're going to listen to people under 40 who have donated to us. And that starts to bring that pool down a little bit, and you can really focus. And the goal is to really understand what motivated those donors, so we can, one, keep them, and two, find more of them. And so depending on the size of that pool, you could go out and just start listening to maybe 5 to 10 people, and seeking those patterns and really asking them questions about, understand their process for how they donated. What was the platform that they found you on? How did they first learn about your organization? What do they remember as sort of igniting their first gift? And those are things I think you might not get the real answer, but what people remember is also valuable, because even if they maybe donated through Facebook, but they remember getting an email, that email is a very important part of that process. And so you can start to listen and seek patterns. You could also do a survey of that group and to, try to find out some of that information that way and get a little more in that quantitative world. And then you take that information and really, look for the patterns, look for what did we not see before, what sort of surprising that came out of it, and how is that important to our work? Because I think the ultimate thing with qualitative, and this goes back to, when we were talking about some of the fears and things that go along with listening, is that if it's not important to your work, then it's okay if those people, disengage or, leave your email list, because that's the most important thing. And we can't let people's feedback change the mission or the work that you're doing. That is ultimately more powerful than anything. But if it's important that people understand, if it's important that people care, those are then you need to listen and really understand it. And
Right.
So you start to look at that information, and if it's stuff you've maybe heard before but haven't done anything about, or something you haven't seen before, you want to start to understand why. Did maybe we have a bias that allowed us to dismiss certain feedback we were getting? And, how can you start to see beyond that? Because, the listening is really starting to put on those other people's shoes and see your work outside of, the super information and knowledge that you have about it, and being able to step outside that and empathize a bit with people so that you can understand what they need at that point to do what you want them to do.
Got it. Okay, so let's go with that. We would like to get a few more younger donors. Let's say that's a goal of ours, and we've identified people in our database who are 40-ish. We just pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, can I ask you a few questions?" Or do we invite them for coffee? Or how do we start talking to people?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways you can do it. So I'll give a few examples because everyone's comfortable with different ways. So, one might be a survey. Put together a survey and send it to everyone 40 below who's a donor. You could just randomly pick, a selection of that group and reach out to them on the phone. You could find those people at different events and just stop and ask to talk to them, after the event. And, sometimes it might even just be, sending an email out to see who's open to it, and starting at least with the people who want to reach back out. That's the most comfortable thing, but realizing that you are, you're talking to the most engaged people. And so you might need to dig a little deeper, but it's okay to start as long as you're aware that there might be other people who are not quite as engaged in that group as well.
Yeah. And I found to not be surprised if they are kind of ignorant about your cause, even if they're donors who've given a lot. Sometimes you're like, well, I donate to cancer. You're like, oh, which organization? Well, to cancer. I donate to cancer. Okay.
Yeah.
There's like 20 organizations. Well, I don't know. It's the cancer one. I donate to cancer, right? And they've been giving to you for 3 or 5 years, and they just know that they give to cancer, which in and of itself is a good insight too. It's like, okay, donors don't know as much about us as we thought maybe they do.
Oh my gosh, they can know so little. And it's, that's something that I've discovered as I've gone from the for-profit world to the nonprofit world. I'm like, there were so many things I did not know. And as I dig deeper into it, I sort of lose that perspective. But people they don't know how you're funded. They don't know how you do the work that you do. They don't even really know what defines a nonprofit. And so, you got to go in with an open mind.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say we identified 60 people, and we've tried talking to them, listening to them. And let's say 20 of them actually had a meaningful conversation with us. Do we record that conversation? Do we log those answers very carefully? Do we just take notes? Let's talk first about how we collect that data. Then let's talk about how we analyze it.
Sure. So it's great to be able to record things with people's permission. And I'll say too, depending on the situation, you can also incentivize people for interviews. With donors, I usually do not, because they're already giving, and so their time can be seen as a gift as well. But there might be some situations where you might need to offer somebody something in reciprocal support for their time. So yeah, I love to be able to record if people are okay with it. I'll usually transcribe interviews in software so that you can search, you can look for common words, maybe things that you wouldn't be aware of just as a human being. That software, like I use Otter a lot to help determine some of those numbers and stats of like word usage and phrases that are used. Some of that is just human interpretation. So you want to try to remove biases as much as possible. And this is where it's helpful to have people outside your organization doing some of this work, because they can prioritize things that you might not be able to, or you might have some biases towards. So yeah, I would, you can do word clouds, you can look for phrases, but also just how did people answer? What really seemed to motivate them? What were some of the social media they used, or some ways they've engaged with you? What were some of their memories about? So it might look more like a paragraph or some bullet points rather than a set of numbers or really clear.
Yeah. We've also done a sentiment analysis in the past where we just identified a few sort of key words that would identify a sentiment. And then you go through the conversation with everyone and you just say, hey, like these 3 keywords fit for this conversation. It's a bit more of a blunt tool, but it's one way to start to categorize things.
Yeah, and there's a lot of software out there that can do that. Another way you can kind of add a little bit of quant in there is to talk to people, understand their sentiment, but then have them fill out a 1 through 5 level of thoughts or feelings on something, and that can help you put put a little bit of stake in the ground where you need to.
Right. Yeah. All right. So we've talked to these people. We got 20 people who said, yeah, raised their hand. We had a conversation with them. We looked through all their answers and we realized that a pattern is that, oh man, a lot of these donors came to us via peer-to-peer events. They're like all younger donors, and a lot of them came through this one event that we do every year where people like invite their friends and everything. And that's the thing that they remember. They keep talking about this event. Well, it's this event, and they kind of almost see us as the event, not necessarily this organization that does a lot more. They see us as this event that does this cool fundraiser for sick kids every year that we participate in by biking or walking or doing something like that. Let's say that's what Neighborly Care found out through this exercise. What are some possible takeaways now?
Yeah, well, I see 2 there that Neighborly Care can do. So, one is to, you mentioned that one of the things we found out was that the people that did this peer-to-peer event don't really see the whole organization. So, all the work that the organization does. And so you could put some extra effort into making sure you're doing content to educate people about the rest of the work. And I would hope that part of that interview might have been understanding what do they think you do and why you care about that, so that you could kind of understand, well, they like this fundraiser that Neighborly Care did, but they also appreciate the home visits that Neighborly Care does. And so you can, start to give them something like a carrot, this next set of engagement that you can do and help cultivate them to become more engaged. But the other thing that you see is like how motivating that this peer-to-peer fundraising was for this age group. And so you can really just double down on your peer-to-peer fundraising and to bring in new donors. And so, it might mean you pull back a little bit on something else because your goal is to, increase the amount of younger donors that you have. And so, I think it would be a really clear and beneficial strategy to just double down on that peer-to-peer fundraising and focus on how you can grow that and making sure you're giving everybody the attention, knowing that those people are then they're going to need to know about that next, level of engagement, that carrot, or get that education that you're giving the people who have done the peer-to-peer.
So if anyone has any questions for Emily up until this point, you can either put them in the chat or you can let me know and unmute yourself and ask her yourself. I know there's been lots of gems that she's given us.
I had one question. Really enjoying this, Emily, and really to do with this younger demographic. We have about 15,000 people that we mail to, which is incredibly expensive for our organization. And most of them would be mature and older donors, and really difficult to segment out then in that number who would be younger donors that we could, begin to talk to.
Is that data you're not collecting? Is that?
Yeah, it's data that we have not collected. I'm rather new to this position, so we haven't sent out anything in a mass mailing to say, if you're, are you in this age bracket kind of thing. We've not done that. Yeah, so I wouldn't know, where to begin kind of thing,
Yeah.
sort of discerning that in our current database.
Well, I know concrete examples are helpful. So let me just give you a little bit of example of something I used with a past client who was, had a similar issue where donors were aging. And what we did is we went to social media. We knew they had some social media following, even though those people weren't donating. And what we did was we put a survey out on Twitter and asked people's age, how long they've been following this organization, what their knowledge or interest level, just like a little open space of what the organization does is, what country they were located in, and a few other questions. And that allowed us to see who was there. It wasn't everybody on Twitter, but we're able to then segment and say, okay, these people in this age group, we got their email address now, we know their age, we know they're in a particular location, and they have a certain understanding of the topic. Let's talk to those people. And so I reached out to them, found 15 people to talk to, and was able to dive in deeper to really understand, why they cared about the organization, why they hadn't donated, what questions they had about what the organization does or misunderstandings. And that allowed us to really pull phrases, to understand what other ways they were getting information, allowed us to know what knowledge gaps they had, and really dig deeper. So I guess what I'm saying for you, Gary, is, there might be another outlet you could use to do that, or you can, do a mailer or an email survey to get that data.
Yeah, I do have about 2,600 email addresses. So in that, there could be a good sample of younger. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, thank you. I won't take more of your time. Thank you so much.
I just kind of want to quickly pull out something that I really like that you said in that answer, Emily, about asking people what their favorite thing about your organization is, or their favorite part of your organization. I think it's so easy for us to focus on the things that we really like about our organization, or the things that we think are the most important about our organization. It's making me think, Mike, you might remember with one of our clients, there was a survey that we did, and it ended up coming back saying that the most popular program was one that we never even considered to be a popular program. And we were completely stunned by that response. But that then opened up so many different, that one simple question opened up so many different methods of possible communication and asks for the future. So I just really liked that you said that.
Yeah. And it's helpful to just understand, because the people that are new to your organization are going to have different motivations than the people who, do a planned gift or have been donating for 10 years. And so it's helpful to understand that difference, because sometimes that's a chocolate event or something that has nothing to do with your mission. But if you don't have that way for people to come in, and it might even be they just like hanging out with people who care about the same issue that they do, even if they don't fully understand how it works or how it's going to change. And so, being able to understand the sort of excitement even if it doesn't fully fit your mission, because you can still, get people to understand it as they engage more.
Totally. Like I said before, you can drop them in the chat or just show up like Caitlin did.
I would love to hear some more about how you use Otter in your listening.
Oh, sure. Well, I use Otter specifically for transcription. So just to be specific, I'll do an interview and record it and then upload the audio file to Otter. And it's great. It can help transcribe everything so that you can also search by words. You can pull quotes as needed. Quotes are always a fun benefit of listening. And then it gives you a bit of data. It'll, say maybe popular phrases, let you know how much everybody spoke. And I'm trying to think if there's any other, you can take, let's say, like you asked 10 people the same question, you could take that, those answers and put them into word clouds, all from 10 different people and see what sort of patterns come out of it. So yeah, it's helpful for those kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks, Emily, for joining us for Build Good Live. That's all for today. Here's my short action plan for you. If you want to start listening to your donors, maybe choose one bit of insight that you would like to gain. So for many nonprofits, a place that we have often started it with is we would like to know donors who've given very frequently to our organization. So years and years in a row. We would like to know what would excite them to actually make a larger gift, because we know they have the capacity to make a larger gift, but they're giving us $100 every single year, and they've done that for 5 or 6 years. But maybe their capacity is to give $1,000 gift or a $5,000 gift or even a $50,000 gift. So just choose one of those things, one thing that you want to find out, narrow it down to the donors who would best help you answer that question. And then email them, get them on the phone, take them out for lunch, and ask them a semi-standard set of questions that allows you to get some standardized data back. And of course, that conversation should be open and free-flowing. You're not just limited to those questions, but have a bit of a framework of the questions you're going to ask everyone so that you have some consistency in your approach. Take it back, review all the data, and see if there's any patterns that you can find, any insights. Maybe everybody kind of mentioned this one thing, or maybe people kept talking about this one program that excites them, or this one reason that they care about you. And then that's your hypothesis. You can now go back to those donors and try something based on your hypothesis. So try an offer based on a hypothesis, try an ask, try engaging them in a certain way, and see if you kind of got it right, if the feedback they gave you that you then translated into something, if that actually worked. And you can do that for a very small amount of donors just to start to get your feet wet, to start listening to your donors. But the sooner you start listening to your donors, the better chance you have of meaningfully engaging people, and as a result, raising more money. As always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. If you want to be part of future Build Good Live, simply go to buildgood.com, sign up with your email address, and we will send you an invite. We go live every second Wednesday. If you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thank you for the work that you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you as you do good in the world.